All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We've got several folks in the conference room here with us today, and I see we've got 7 folks signed up online. So we appreciate everyone taking the time to join us this morning. My name is Dan Reese. I'm the local park grant program manager here at Texas Parks and Wildlife. I'll be joined by the majority of our team and a few other folks from the agency this morning. And you guys are all here to learn more about local park grants. So thanks again for joining us. We want to encourage everyone to ask questions throughout the presentation today. So if you're online, we do have someone monitoring the GoToWebinar. So feel free to please type your questions in that little control panel on the right side of your screen there. And then for the folks that are here at any point in time, please raise your hand and ask questions. We want to keep this as interactive as possible and not just us up here talking the whole time. So with that said, I'm going to get started on the presentation. All right, so this is what we have in store for everyone this morning. We'll go through some introductions first. We'll provide everyone with a brief overview of the local park program. Does that work, Phil? Okay. Blake Powers is here. He's going to run through our system, Rec Grants Online. And then we're going to the team will come up and we'll all present our scoring criteria. And so we're on year 4 of the current scoring criteria for our program. It was developed, finalized in 2019 after about 2 years of public input throughout the state. So we help facilitate all that, but really, y'all help assemble all that. And so we'll go through the ins and outs of the scoring criteria. And then we'll also discuss the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan in brief detail and provide an update on that and an opportunity for us to gather additional public input from everyone. So again, please ask questions as we go along. So I'll go through a little of the introductions on our side first. Dana Lagarde is our director. Unfortunately, she is busy this morning and unable to pop in and say hi. But Dana's been in Rec Grants for about 20 years now. First in the co-op program. She was in the local park program for a number of years and has been our director now since 2018 or so. Again, my name is Dan Reese. I'm the manager of the local park grant program. I've been with the program a little over 9 years now. Blake Powers is sitting over here on my left. Blake is our business systems administrator. And he's definitely your primary point of contact for any issues with Argo. Amy Grossman is our compliance coordinator. Unfortunately, Amy's under the weather and is not participating this morning. But Amy's role in our team is a little different than everyone else. She doesn't actually manage active grants. She's in charge of the long-term compliance for our 3,000 plus funded parks throughout the state of Texas. So we'll go into a little more detail on long-term compliance a little later this morning. And then here's the remainder of the local park team. So these are the folks that I'm lucky enough to get to go to work with every day, either in person or virtually. Megan Nelson is joining us. She's back here in the back. And if you guys want to say a little bit about yourself when you come up and present. I think, unless you'd rather do it now, but maybe we'll, just when you get up, if you want to say a little bit about yourself. Matt Mears is another one of our grant coordinators. Matt also is under the weather today and unable to join us. Sorry that you all won't get the opportunity to meet Amy and Matt, but I'm sure you'll have a chance to work with them sometime in the near future. Lindsay Santum, Dr. Santum is another one of our grant coordinators. And Crystal Locke is another one of our grant coordinators. So that's pretty much the local park team. We've got 4 grant coordinators, myself and Amy. And before I give everyone an opportunity to tell us about who y'all are and where you came from, I'd also like to recognize Sue Riley, who's sitting in the back. Sue's on our inland fisheries team. The inland fisheries division, in addition to the wildlife division and the coastal fisheries division, play a very important role in our program and our evaluation of applications. And so Sue was kind enough to join us this morning. And I don't know, Sue, do you want to say a couple words? All right. Thanks, Sue. And we'll again discuss the environmental component and the conservation component in a little more detail when we go through the scoring criteria. All right, so I'll start the program overview portion. And for those of you that are joining online, if you'd like to introduce yourself virtually. Whoops, sorry, I did get ahead of myself, didn't I? Before we do program overview, I'd like to give everyone that's here an opportunity to introduce themselves and just tell us where you're from. Let us know, are you representing a city or a county, or are you a consultant? And then let us know if you have any previous experience with our grant program. So I'll start right here with the San Antonio guys.
Yeah, my name is John Silva. I'm a special project manager with the City of San Antonio Parks and Recreation Department. This is my first experience with grants, personally for me. I'm transitioning to the position, so this will be my first go about with the grant program. But people within our department are very experienced with the process.
Yeah, we have a long partnership, successful partnership with San Antonio.
Hi, good morning. My name is Patrick Parch. I am the design and construction coordinator with San Antonio Parks and Rec. And just like John said, working with experienced folks. But I myself am also in
All right. Well, welcome. Thanks. Cool. Are you in the Austin office? Yeah. Oh, awesome. Perfect. Well, thanks for joining us. Awesome. Super. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Murphy. I'm just doing off 11 years working for Texas Park Moreland, and now I'm a consultant with a business called Visitor Experience.
Thanks, Kai.
I'm Lauren. I'm director of Church Parks and Recreation. We have had application last year to get my score up and get a refresher on all the requirements. We have some grant experience as a consultant with Anglo, and I'm a little bit experienced, but you guys have taken a years.
Yeah.
Very good work.
Well, thanks for coming up. So you made the drive up I-35 as well. Always an adventure. All right, well, thanks. And again, for you folks that are joining in online, if you'd like to just tell us a little bit about yourself in the virtual component, we're happy that you were able to join us this morning. So now I'll get back on track and go through a little bit about the local park program. So we do have an annual call for applications. These dates have fluctuated a little bit over the last few years, but we're looking to stay consistent moving forward. And so applications do open May 1st. So we're getting pretty close there. And then applications are due no later than August 1st, 2023. And that's 5 p.m. Central Time. I don't think we have anyone from the Mountain Time Zone joining us this morning, but those are Central Time. And so for this year, and we'll go into the individual programs we have in local parks in the next couple of slides. But this year we're planning on offering the small community program, as well as the non-urban outdoor program and the urban outdoor program. And we'll go into the details and requirements for each of those programs shortly. Following that August 1st deadline later this year, we would anticipate presenting our funding recommendations to the Texas Parks and Wildlife Commission in January of 2024. All right, so here's the basics. So the local park grant program provides matching grants to local units of government for the acquisition, renovation, and new development of public parkland. All of our grants through the local parks program are 50-50 matching grants. Funds are distributed on a reimbursement basis. So essentially, if you're awarded a grant, you spend the money up front, and then you get reimbursed 50% of that. The grants are awarded through a competitive application process. So again, we'll go through the scoring criteria in a little more detail this morning. What I think is one of the coolest parts about our program is that once a park has been funded, it becomes dedicated as public parkland in perpetuity. And we do check them. And so currently we've got close to 3,000 parks that have been funded through our program since the late 60s. And we do on a 5-year cycle go out and check each one. For the most part, all grants are given a period of 4 years to complete once the grant agreement's been issued. For state-funded parks, we give you 4 years right off the bat. For federally funded projects, and we'll go into some of the differences between the funding streams in just a little bit. For federal grants, you get 3 years right out of the gate with the opportunity to extend to 4 if needed. So I mentioned the different programs. We do have both indoor programs and outdoor programs. I'll run through these. For the outdoor programs, we have the small community program. So essentially any sponsor or local unit of government that's got a population of 20,000 or less is eligible for the small community program. All of the programs essentially use the same scoring criteria. The award ceiling for the small community program is $150,000. So again, these are all 50-50 matching grants. So essentially a $150,000 grant would be a $300,000 project. Then we have what we call the non-urban outdoor program. So this would include any sponsor with a population of 500,000 or less. So this would also include anyone that's eligible for the small community program. The award ceiling for the non-urban outdoor program is $750,000. And I should mention regarding the award ceilings, these are maximum amounts. You don't have to request the full amount. There's no penalty for requesting less than that, and your application is not any less competitive if you do request less than the ceiling. I'm going to skip ahead to the urban outdoor program before I discuss the indoor programs. So basically, if your city or county has a population of 500,000 or more, you're eligible for only the urban outdoor program. Currently, I think we have 18 urbans in the state of Texas. San Antonio, you guys are definitely an urban. Bear County as well. The award ceiling for the urban outdoor program is 1.5 million. And now I'll discuss the indoor program. So we do have both urban indoor and non-urban indoor. The population requirements for the indoor programs are the same as the outdoor. Indoor grants are offered not annually. The availability, it kind of depends on the availability of state funding. Unfortunately, we're unable to use federal funding for indoor grants, only state funding. So our state funding is determined each legislative session. And so we're right in the middle of a session now. And so we're hopeful that our state funding comes out of the session and looks positive, and we'll be able to bring the indoor programs back. Again, if that's the case, it won't be in 2023, it'd be in 2024. Any questions thus far from anyone? I don't see any online either. All right. So who all is eligible to apply for local park grants? Again, local units of government in the state of Texas. This could include cities, counties, river authorities, and certain circumstances, utility districts are also eligible. Essentially, if you've been given the legislative responsibility to provide recreation to your citizens, you are eligible. If you are representing a river authority or utility district and you're unsure, just reach out to us and we'd be happy to work with you to determine your eligibility. On the other side of that, who is ineligible to apply, that would include school districts, nonprofits, local units of government with significant compliance issues. And again, we'll touch on compliance later. Non-public entities, HOAs, detention centers. If you're representing a potential applicant or you're with one of these in groups that are ineligible, again, reach out to us and we'd be happy to discuss other opportunities with you. So I mentioned acquisition, renovation, and new development. Those are all eligible costs. In addition to construction, professional services are also eligible for reimbursement. We do cap those at 12% of the total construction cost. So this could include surveying, engineering, landscape architecture, anything along those lines that is going towards the successful completion of your project. And then in terms of specific facilities that are eligible, think about the local park that you grew up going to as a kid, the one in your neighborhood now, maybe the one where you take your kids now. Pretty much anything in a local park that you see now is going to be eligible. And so this is kind of I'll run through these quickly. This is kind of our picture heavy portion, but pools, tennis courts, ball fields, basketball, picnic facilities. I don't know if we put a pickleball in here, but we've certainly noticed a big increase in pickleball popularity, at least our last few grant cycles. Plazas, disc golf, interpretive signage. Some of you may recognize some of these pictures from some of your parks. Dog park, skate park, sand volleyball. I think you all kind of get the picture here. Trails. We do also have a recreational trails program within rec grants. If anyone that's attending today or viewing this later has a trail project in mind that's primarily a trail component, reach out to us and we'd be happy to work with you to determine if a local park application or a trails application might be a better fit. Essentially, if you're planning anything other than trails, probably the local park program would be a better fit. But we'd be happy to discuss your project with you. Soccer, pedestrian bridges, that may be a San Antonio one there. You guys may recognize that one. Swimming pools, aquatic complexes. And then on the indoor side, rec centers, community centers, natatorium, YMCA's are eligible in addition to boys and girls clubs, provided that the facility is owned by the sponsor. You just have some sort of lease agreement with that entity. And then on the flip side of that, in terms of what costs are ineligible, so landscaping is eligible. It does need to be a native plant. The one exception to that is if you're doing some sort of ball field, it would do permit Bermuda grass for that. We do have some resources in the application for native plant databases. But again, if you have any questions on that, please reach out to us. Historic structures, professional facilities, obviously no grant funding went into the stadium there in Arlington. Amusement parks, any kind of residential facility, hotels, luxury cabins, monuments, public art, and then I should mention support facilities as well. So a support facility, we would consider that like a parking lot. A restroom is considered a support facility. So it's something that's not directly tied to recreation. So we have support facilities on both the eligible side and the ineligible side. So if you have, for example, a parking lot at that famous stadium there in Arlington, also that would be considered ineligible. All right, so any questions so far before we move into funding streams? Sure. I'm sorry? Bermuda grass? Okay. So that, did you have a specific question or want me to just? It's eligible provided that it's on a ball field. So if you're doing soccer or baseball, until we find that popular variety of Bermuda or buffalo grass that takes foot traffic. But yeah.
Question from online, Jeff from Iowa Parks and Recreation, clarify historic structure.
Sure. Hey, Jeff from Hedda, thanks for joining us. So historic structures, basically, if you've got a park that's got a historic structure in that park, that doesn't prohibit funding of that park. If you're doing any kind of renovation to that structure, that's where the request would be ineligible. And so if you're stabilizing something, we had a project in Bexar County recently at the old Hot Wells Spring Resort, and we were able to fund that, but basically we funded the trails, some of the support facilities there, some of the lighting, but in terms of the actual structure there in the park, they did all sorts of renovation, they stabilized it. So any of those elements are tied specifically to the renovation of that structure would be ineligible. Okay.
And then I've seen a lot of harbor master plans that point to the need of applying design. Easy answer, is that supporting or direct? Is that kind of available for you talking about?
So for interpretive signage, if you're interpreting, it's a good question. If you're interpreting environmental features, maybe you're working in some neat sustainability design in the park and you're interpreting that's eligible. If you're interpreting maybe threatened species that are in the area, that would be eligible. Any kind of historical interpretation would be considered ineligible. Yeah, any kind of signage like that is eligible. Yeah. Jeff, let me know if that addressed your question, and if not, I'm going to keep moving forward, but feel free to clarify for me. So funding sources, you've heard me mention a few times this morning, we do have both state funding and federal funding. I'll go through the sources of those funding as well as the differences between the two briefly. So again, our state funding comes from the agency's appropriation on sporting goods sales tax. The amount appropriated to the local park program is determined each legislative session for the upcoming biennium. Most of you probably remember Proposition 5 from 2019, which essentially guaranteed the continued and consistent influx of sporting goods sales tax into our program. Within our state funding, we put, or the LBB puts our appropriation into two different accounts. So we have the Texas Recreation and Parks account, and essentially that funds all of our small community and non-urban state-funded grants. And then we also have the Texas Large County and Municipality Recreation and Parks account, which is a mouthful, so we call that the urban account. And as you probably guessed, that funds all of our urban projects. Then we also have federal funding. You probably all heard or are familiar with the Land and Water Conservation Fund. Signed into law, the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act in 1964 by our very own President Johnson there. We're pretty sure that's an actual picture of him doing that, but we're still waiting to verify that. And so that's been a very constant stream of local park funding since that time. The Great American Outdoors Act, you probably all remember that from several years ago. Similar to Proposition 5 here locally. That was just another guarantee of, a consistent and even in this case, an increase in federal funding. And then the federal funding comes from, I mentioned the sporting goods sales tax for the state funding. The federal funding comes from offshore oil and gas royalties. In addition to the local park grant program, our administration of LWCF funding, we also have the ORLAP program, Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, which is a federally administered program. We do submit applications and administer successful grants on behalf of the National Park Service there. We're not going to get into the specifics of the ORLAP program too much this morning. But again, if anyone has any questions on that, please feel free to ask. And we'd be happy to go over the ORLAP program. In terms of the differences of the two programs, the trend over the last few years, particularly the current biennium, is we've had a lot more federal funding available for local park grants than we have state funding. If you are submitting in the urban or non-urban program, there's a pretty good chance your project will probably be awarded federal funding. So with that in mind, the two funding streams are essentially identical, but there are some pretty significant differences. If your proposal, you're utilizing the value of publicly owned non-park land. So say your city owns land that's maybe purchased for a fire station several years ago, and now your plans have changed and you'd like to put a park there now. You can dedicate that as parkland and use the value of that land. However, that's not permitted in the federal program. And then essentially any kind of project that's on land that's anything less than fee simple ownership. So parkland easement, leased, maybe from another unit of government. Those are pretty tricky with federal funding. And so, if you have a project in mind that you're planning on or interested in submitting in either the non-urban or the urban program that's utilizing one of these two methods for your match, or your project, please reach out to us and discuss it with us ahead of time. And then for the small community folks, in almost all cases, the small community grants are funded with state funding. All right, I am going to step aside and let Blake Powers join us. And Blake's going to run through recreation grants online. And I'll be back. Thanks, Blake.
Hey everybody, I'm Blake. I'm the systems analyst for recreation grants. I administer the recreation grants online system. It's essentially an application system and a grant management system, which makes a lot of different complexity. When something becomes a project, it obviously gets much more complex than when it's an application. But today we'll just be looking at the application part of it. This is the digital portal we use to accept, review, and score grant applications, and then we manage them throughout the entire grant management lifecycle, as we talked about. Not really going to get into the post application process too much. There's plenty to unpack with just the application process, but we'll run through a little bit. Let's talk about some essential, just big picture things about recreation grants online. First of all, when you register for the system, if you haven't done so already, you're going to need to register your organization. For those of you that use the old recreation grants online system, you could just come in and sign up with an email and start a grant application. That puts the program in some pretty precarious positions if nobody from the actual organization is in the system and representing them. So if you're a grant consultant, you cannot start a grant application on someone's behalf. And if you do not have an organization in the system, then you don't have an account, right? So when you sign up, the original sign up is going to require you to designate somebody as the administrator of the organization itself, right? What that means digitally is that you'll be able to add and remove users from the organization in the system, right? Then once the organization account is approved, so you'll go to the Argo login page and you'll choose the new user option, and then you'll create an account in the system for the organization and yourself, right? Once that account is approved, you can also, other users can create user accounts and request to join the organization. I approve all of those. I would suggest that if you want to add folks to your organization, then instead of trying to do it yourself, you just have them use the new user link. And then once your organization is already set up in the system, they'll see the option to join it in the pull down menu, okay? That's the reason that I suggest that, is because if it does become a project, I have the capability to add somebody to all of the documents related to the project in the system. And the administrator typically they have to do that one click at a time. I just have a tool that will add everybody at once. So I would suggest using that interface. Not much of an issue during the application process. The one thing that does come up though, sometimes folks will create an organization, they'll go in, they'll get their application started, and they'll discover, oh, I need my finance person, or I need my landscape person to look at this. And they'll add folks to the organization without having them go through the interface that's on the login page so that I can do it. When you do that, a document that's already created in the system does not automatically add people that weren't present when it was created, okay? So typically what happens is people will add a couple of folks to their organization and they'll say, oh, I can't get to the application. That's because you have to go to the actual application and check their names, okay? All of this is covered online in the Argo Quick Start Guide. So if there's anything you're not picking up today, this is not meant to be an Argo tutorial, just meant to give you some big concepts. But there's a Quick Start user guide that literally walks you through every piece of the application process online. And I'll maybe try to get out of that and just show you where that is in the system. The organization administrators we talked about can initiate a new application. They can assign and remove members to their organization, and they can edit and save documents within the application. All right, and then you'll notice this application administrator. One of the cool things is if you decide I want to administer my organization, but I'm going to have people that I can decide what their roles are, you will be the sponsor administrator and they'll be sponsor staff. Now at the organization level, that means they can't add and remove users, but down at the application, once it's created, you can elevate them to the admin for that, okay? It's basically like if you work for a big municipality and you have, hundreds of employees, like, let's say Houston Parks and Rec or Austin Parks and Rec. A lot of those orgs will have, one administrator, 20 staff, but then on their applications, so-and-so may be the administrator for this application, and then so-and-so may be the administrator for this one. And it allows you to basically designate different PMs for each project. So that's kind of a nice feature of the system. Organization and account users, people affiliated with the local unit of government that receives the grant funding, and these include city managers, mayors, county staff, parks department staff, etc. What I'm looking for at a technical level is, do you have an email address that matches the organization? And if you don't, if you're so small that you don't have an organizational unit, then what I'm going to do is when somebody asks to join the organization, I'm going to ask the administrator, hey, do you recognize this person? Can I add them? I don't just randomly add people to your organization. So that's why we manually curate all those account requests. The application users are the people responsible for completing applications as selected by the appropriate account user. They can be an account user or from an outside org. How does this come into play? Grant consultants. When you join the system, I'm going to put you in the generic grant consultants organization. In your title, you can designate what firm you work for, anything like that, but there's not anything in the system that preferences grant consultant orgs, because you can't get a grant. So if you're not an eligible grant entity, you will not have an account in Argo for your organization. But if you're a consultant, I'll put you in our broad grant consultants organization, and then the entity that creates the application can add you in any capacity they want. If they want to add you as the administrator at that point, great. You can take the whole project. But what works is there's still somebody from that org responsible for the grant. So when it goes to sign the grant agreement, if you get awarded, it's not the consultant signing, right? Obviously, it's somebody from the eligible entity there. 3 roles for both account users and application administrators: administrator, staff, and viewer. What are the differences in these? Well, if you designate somebody as staff member on the application, what that means is they can complete all the forms and they can save them, but they cannot submit the application. You must be an administrator. That's designed to let people sort of designate folks as the project folks, but before it comes in, like maybe you want to review it, right? So if you want that distinction in place, then the folks that are at the sponsor staff level can do, they can save the forms on the application, but they cannot submit it. If you want them to be able to submit it, then you'll want to make them a sponsor administrator, okay? Additionally, if you get awarded a project, if this person is going to create reimbursement requests or sign the grant agreement, they're going to need the sponsor administrator role to do so, okay? Just gives you a little bit of a distinction to where you can have folks working on your applications, but you still have some authority above them, sort of cross-check their work before it comes in for any kind of official review. Creating an account for a consultant, like I say, you'll just, when you go to the new user screen, you'll fill in all your information, and for the organization, you'll put grant consultants, and I'll take it from there, okay? The organization administrator can initiate the new application, and then as we talked about, you can add the desired consultant to the application in whatever security role that you wish. Okay, sponsors can access Argo 2020 by visiting our TPWD Rec Grants website and choosing the Apply Manage link. That's the best way to get there. If you already have an account for your sponsor organization, you can log in with that account and view and apply for any currently available grant opportunity. The local parks grant application will open May 1. So at 8 a.m., you'll see it there as an available opportunity. Prior to that, you won't be able to create an application. If you don't have an account for your sponsor organization, then you'll need to request one, like we talked about through the new user interface. On the home page of once you click that Apply Manage link and you go over to the Rec Grants Online page, there's a couple of places to get to resources. You'll see that on this slide, there's one that's highlighted in the body of the page, but if you just, in the top left corner of the screen, if you just click resources, it'll take you to the same place, right? What you're looking for, if you want programmatic advice, is the local parks grant program resources. That's a very handy tool. Right now, for example, the grant writing webinar from last year is posted. A lot of sample documentation posted, sample applications posted. You're going to want to understand the programmatic resources there. They're going to be very rich, and Local Parks has among the most detailed set of resources of any of our grant programs. So very handy to review that. Beyond that, if you go to this resources page and you scroll down, one of the links says Argo Quick Start User Guide. That is specifically for applicants. Okay, it does not cover anything post-application. It covers everything in the application process. So Encourage you to review those. It's broken as a big document, but I've also broken it down into essentially all the subcomponents of the application process, everything from getting your account to saving the forms. How do I know if I can submit my application? Because what I can tell you about the system is it will not let you submit an incomplete application, okay? And the guides detail the icons that appear next to your application forms, and it tells you basically if it's green, you're good. If there's a yield sign on it, you got some work to do. And if it's a blank page, you haven't opened it yet, right? So it's pretty simple in that sense. What you need is all green, right? Essentially there's a little piece of paper with a pencil on it, but you need all of the same kind of icon on your application forms, and that lets you know that it's ready to submit, okay? This is a very important slide. If you have no other takeaway, take this away. Do not wait until the last minute. It happens every single year. There are people on the phone, people in tears, and people that lose jobs because they procrastinated and they didn't do what they're supposed to do. Do not wait until the last minute. The system will not let you submit this application 1 millisecond after 5 o'clock. And all of the instructions that show you a status change button all goes away at 5 o'clock and 0.01 milliseconds on the due date. So do not wait. Another couple of tips I would give you is this. If you're working through the application and you come to a section where you see a narrative, right? You're talking about something that's 8,000, 10,000 characters. Don't type that in the system, because my page is set to timeout at 60 minutes, but I have no idea what your browser page is set to timeout at, or what your network is set to timeout at. If you're a municipality, your IT group has their own things that they do. So what I would suggest is if you're going to work on one of those narratives, type it in a Microsoft Word document. Get the question, have it where you're not going to lose. You're not going to be on there typing for 20 minutes and then it disappears, right? That happens a lot on the due date as well. I've had that conversation with folks. I've also had folks come in and download the application, get it in Word format, get everything completed, and think they're going to come in at 3 p.m. on the day it's due and just copy and paste that in the system. That never works. Never seen that work. So don't do that. Okay. Account the extra needed time to address error checks. This is important because, again, if you have not successfully cleared the error check on every single form in the application, you cannot submit it. So if you get to 459.59 and you go to submit and the system says, oh, we detected an error, you missed the deadline. So don't wait. Yeah, sure.
When you're mentioning attachments, when y'all get those attachments, do you prefer them in Word or anyone?
It can be typically the system will prompt you what it's looking for. I think PDF is generally preferred because, you know, just from your end, it gives you some sense that you've kind of sealed the document off from easy editing. You know, that's kind of what I would suggest. But, you know, certain uploads will take Word, or there are pictures in some of them. Generally, if you encode things as PDF, it works really smooth in the system. What I would recommend when you're naming your PDFs, this is a little bit of an advanced tip. Do not put a % sign in any of them. Don't put 100% complete, because when that comes up in a browser, browsers interpret a % sign as a space. So they can't find your document. Because when you put 100% completed specs.pdf and we try to pull that up in a browser, the URL that's created actually thinks it's 100 space specs PDF, and there's no such document. Okay, so avoid that kind of stuff. Use underscores and dashes, that's fine, but don't use special characters. Avoid the % sign at all costs. All right. This is an example, and our folks will get to it, but popular page where you're going to probably run into an error is the budget page. Okay, that page is going to require you to meet very specific parameters of your proposed budget, including the cap on professional services, including your match. All of that stuff is calculated in that page. So don't wait to get into the budget page, and then if you have questions, let our team know. If they're programmatic questions, you're going to want to refer to your grant coordinator. If you're thinking, I've done everything that I know right technically and I'm still getting an error, then that's when you'd want to reach out to me and we can determine if there's a technical reason that you're getting that. Okay. That's it. That's the last slide. Does anybody have any additional questions? Like I say, this is not an Argo workshop. That's why these are mostly slide driven, and I didn't get into the clicks on the screen, but I can tell you that once you create the application and you go through the quick start guide, I think you'll find it fairly intuitive in terms of the technical piece of it. That's the idea, so that you can worry about the programmatic piece, which is really the more complex element of the application. Okay. All right. Anybody online with any questions? Monitoring y'all here. All right, I'm going to hand it back to the local parks team. Again, if anybody has any questions, my contact information is all over the application. Generally, I try to respond as quickly as I can. I know that you're all, when you have a question and you're working through those forms, it behooves you to get the answer you need so that you can, go ahead and progress and not have to wait because I haven't gotten back to you. So I try to do my best on that. So, thanks, everybody.
Hello, good morning. I'm Megan Nelson. I'm grant coordinator with the Recreation Grants Program. I've been with the agency now for about 10 years, and I've been in this role for a year now. So we're going to go over the local park grant life cycles. So basically how it starts is with the pre-application assistance. We're always available if you have any questions or need help with while you're in the application process. Then you submit your application, again, August 1st by 5 p.m., no later. The second step is we start to score all the applications that we received. That typically happens between August and November because we do score them individually and then we score them as a group. So it does take quite a bit of time depending on how many applications we get for us to score those applications. After the scoring, then we decide who we're going to choose for funding, and we take that to the commission, and that's typically in January, and that'll be in January of 24, and that's when we decide, and the commission decides who will be awarded. Then active projects, if you're state funded, are 3-year projects. If you're federally funded, they're 4-year projects. Okay, that's the other way around. So if you're federally funded, you're a 3-year project. If you're state funded, you're a 4-year project. And then after that, you go into post-completion in perpetuity, which means the park and the project need to remain in perpetuity. So for the scoring process, the application deadline, again, you'll hear this many times, is August 1st, 5 p.m., no later. And then, like I said before, we do the application scoring, which is individual reviews. So we individually score them, and then we score them as a committee. And again, that takes between August and November. Then we also do, we have partner reviews, which is going to include the TPWD Natural Resource Review, which Sue Riley and her team, as well as our wildlife team, take a look at all those applications and see if they have any comments or concerns with your proposal, as well as historical reviews from the Texas Historic Commission, and those usually happen between November and January. Then we take it, your project and the applications, and we in front of our commission for a notice of approval, and that will be January 25th of 2024. After that, you'll get your notification of your award. And then there's the pre-award process. So you'll get your notification of award. We'll find out January of 2024, and we'll let you know probably within a few days that you've been awarded the project. Then we're going to set up what's called a pre-agreement site visit. So the grant coordinator is going to come out, meet with the staff, and get a view of the project in person. So we'll go to the site and meet with your staff to see where this project is going to take place. Typically, we're going to have those between February and March. And then we're going to submit your applications for any that are federally funded. We'll submit that to the National Park Service by July 31st. And then after that, there's just, we'll do admin processing, which is basically just all of our internal tasks. Documents, paperwork, follow-up, research that we have to do on our end. And then the grant agreement will be sent to the grantees for final signature May of 24 for state funded, and by September of 24 for anybody that's federally funded. And now I'm going to have Crystal come up and talk about the active grant process.
Hello, I'm Crystal Locke. I'm one of the newer members of the team. I've been with TPWD for about 8 months now. I spent the last 14 years with the city of Brenham in the Parks and Recreation Department, where we were successful with some of the local park projects along with rec trails projects. And so I got here as quickly as possible to join the team. So as Megan kind of walked you through, so we're at the point of you've got that grant agreement in hand. You're going to get that executed and you're going to upload that back into our Argo system. That will trigger a notification on our end so that we're able to see that that's there. We're going to confirm that there's signatures on that grant agreement, on the boundary map, along with the land dedication certification. And that will also begin triggering those quarterly status reports. And those are super important to us to give us updates on your projects regularly. So those are due by the 15th of the month of January, April, July, and October. So once we've got through that, all of your signatures are uploaded. We're going to begin based on your scope, based on your project. We're going to be triggering those project elements in Argo. And those include some of our temporary and permanent signage, the construction plans and specifications, TCQ, TDLR, making sure those projects are getting registered. The biggest piece too is once you're at 100% signed and sealed construction plans, you'll upload those into Argo. We'll receive that notification. Our team will review within 2 weeks, and then you'll get an email from your grant coordinator issuing that notice to proceed with construction. Obviously, then comes reimbursements. So you'll be able to initiate those reimbursements. And we ask that those just be submitted regularly based on your project scope or based on a small community versus our non-urbans or urbans. Don't wait. Well, sometimes it's not a bad idea if it's a smaller project, but if it's if it's for a longer period of time, it's easier just to get those. They come in and get those submitted, which takes us then into project completion. So on that quarterly status report, one of the last questions is going to ask you if you're ready for that final inspection. If you are, you're going to trigger yes, which will then put us as your grant coordinator in touch with you to go ahead and get boots on the ground and visit your park site. And we're looking for all of those funded grant elements. Moving into our post-completion expectations. So again, all grant-funded park and recreation outdoor elements must last for 25 years. If we're looking at swimming pools or indoor facilities, those must last for 40 years. And as Dan alluded to earlier, we do check. So all of those parks, we're almost at 3,000 parks that are in our database. And our local parks team is out visiting these parks every 5 years. So again, within those first 25 years, you're awarded a project. As we're coming out to your park, we're expecting to see those elements that were funded. Yeah, of course.
Would splash pads fall under the 25 years or the 40? I know it says 40.
Yeah, 25. Splash pads are 25. No, great question. Yeah, if there's Dan had also mentioned too, in terms of the parks that are funded, and the great part about that is these parks are now parks forever. And so after those 25 years or that 40-year lifespan, we're specifically looking now at like that park boundary. And so making sure that that's still intact with the meets and bounds survey that you've uploaded once you get into your project. So if there's any planning, any big changes, we realize things happen, but we just ask that you reach out to us and have that conversation, because we want to make sure that your projects and your organization stay in compliance so that you can compete for future federal or for future funding. And again, just that in perpetuity, parks are parks forever, and we love that. Any questions as far as the timeline? Yeah, Lauren. Yeah. So those are usually, those are usually posted at least a couple of weeks prior to, and so you'll be able to see that list beforehand. Well, this last year, like I'd personally reached out to those that were going to be awarded to let them know, because our commissioners also love to hear from our project sponsors. So that gives them an opportunity to be present and, share a little bit more information about the project.
So we do let all the applicants know once we do.
Any other questions? I know a bigger piece too on the pre-award side. Megan had mentioned that site visit, and again, so there's where if you're a small community versus our non-urban or urban application, that LWCF packet is a big to-do. And so for our small communities, we're visiting the site, we're excited about the project, and we're going straight into getting y'all set up in CAPS and getting that grant agreement prepared. Versus, again, those non-urbans and urban projects, there's still that Land Water Conservation Fund application window that's in June and July that we're submitting. So it's a little bit, there's a lengthier process for those projects. Any other questions timeline-wise? Okay. Are we okay to break? Do we want to keep moving forward? What do you think? Yeah, of course. Let's take a break. Of course. All right, it looks like we've got most back. All right, so we're going to move into our TPWD, our mission, our values, and our scoring criteria that was adopted in 2019. So the mission for Texas Parks and Wildlife is to manage and conserve the natural and cultural resources of Texas and to promote hunting and fishing and that big outdoor recreation piece, for the use and enjoyment of current or present and future generations. Our core values. All right, so we've integrated the TPWD core values into our scoring criteria. Okay, so we've integrated the TPWD core values into our scoring criteria, and those are excellence, integrity, service, stewardship, and teamwork, and all combined for a 100-point system. All right, so we're going to start with excellence, which this includes our goals and objectives, our timeline and costs, and the site design. And this section is worth 25 points on that 100-point scale. So first being goals and objectives. One of the first things that you're going to fill out is that statement of work. And we just ask that it be clear and relevant and eligible. And so again, this year, Dan had mentioned our indoor program we're not offering. And so if we're looking at a statement of work and it includes a recreation facility, that project wouldn't be eligible for our outdoor recreation program. We're looking for the project goals being SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Connections to that land and water plan and to our Texas outdoor recreation plan, along with connecting to your local master plan or any community identified needs. And then we'll also have the short and long-term project benefits. So specific to the land and water plan, we've got TPWD has identified 4 goals for our land and water plan, as you see on the screen. So at a minimum, all of our applications should at least be connecting to item number 2 to increase access and participation in the outdoors. So again, in the application, it's going to ask you, again, how your project ties into our land and water plan and our TORP plan. The more that you're able to connect with these goals, the better. Moving into our Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, or our TORP. So this is our roadmap in allocating resources for our outdoor recreation opportunities. The purpose of the TORP is to measure supply and demand and then create those strategic goals to address that gap. Lindsay has been working a lot on the TORP, and we also have a note about completing our community needs survey. So these results help us update our scoring criteria, along with give us an understanding of what projects that Texans want to see funded. We've got a QR code towards the latter part of the presentation, and so if you've got some time to help us out and fill that survey out, we would appreciate it. Lindsay? There's also physical copies in the back. Yes, if you're a TRAPS member, earlier this week, you would have received an email with a link to that survey. We're trying to really push for those survey completions to, again, help us with our scoring criteria, help us fund projects that our sponsors want to see. So if you're able to help us out, that would be great. Do you have anything else to add?
No, that's great, but yeah, please tell us what you want through the survey. It does take a little bit of time, so make sure you get your coffee, sit down, fill it out. And this helps to ensure that we're funding the types of things that your communities actually need and want.
Yeah. So our TORP plan is updated every 5 years. So the first graphic on the screen that you'll see is from our 2018, our current plan. But it lists Texans' top 10 areas of participation for outdoor recreation. And those include walking and swimming and sightseeing and attending outdoor festivals. And so if your project includes an amphitheater and your goal is to host some of these outdoor events, use that connection. Another opportunity to connect with the TORP is through the identified needs. And as you can see, the chart shows the most common responses lacking outdoor activities by region, regions 2 through 6. Most common response is trails. So if your project includes trails, make that connection. Moving into our timeline and budget. So just as a reminder, for most of us reviewing these applications, we may not have been to your site or are familiar with your project. So keep in mind in terms of making it easy for us to understand what is being built. For somebody that hasn't been to the site, that doesn't have any information about the project, so making it easy for us to understand what's being built. So in the project proposal, we'd like a detailed timeline for your project, along with a budget that's feasible and credible in terms of land acquisition, development, or if it includes both. Some of the timeline tips is just to consider those TPWD requirements. We've mentioned that these projects for FY24 will be approved at commission in January of 2024. That gives us a starting point. Pending whether or not you're a non-urban or an urban like San Antonio, again, more than likely your project is going to be funded through that Land and Water Conservation Fund. So we've got that additional NPS submission that's going to happen in June, July. So you're not looking for a grant agreement until September. And again, building in sufficient time. If you've got pedestrian bridges and you know that there might be some core coordination, or THC asks for some additional archaeological surveys. So just be sure you're adding in sufficient time for permitting. And I've got a couple of examples. We see examples similar to A that is very not thorough. Professional services will take us 6 months, construction will take us 9 months, and then there's project closeout. We'd really like to see some more thought put into the timeline. So we've given example B, and again, this is more so for federal funding. We're highlighting the TPWD requirements. We're showing when commission approval is. We're mentioning those quarterly status reports and the reimbursements. We're mentioning the pre-agreement compliance, the permitting. So the more thought that you can put into the timeline, the better. Does anybody have questions specific to the timeline? All right, so moving into our budget example, which I'm actually going to pull up our application. Give me a second. Maybe I am. Sorry, Blake.
Oh, it's over there. Oh, yeah. You have to move it to that screen. Okay, I forgot the people here were going to need to see it as well. Can you go over there? Nope. Okay.
Well, we can move forward too and come back if we've got some time.
It's okay. What we'll do is minimize, and now we'll show this screen.
Thank you guys for your patience.
There you go.
Perfect. Logging in as you. I hope that's okay. All right, so we're just going to go to Arlen, which is our test application, and I am going to pull up the project budget details. All right, so this is what you're going to see when you work in the project details form of the application. And so there's 3 different categories for our budget summary, and that consists of the first being professional services, and it mentions up here in the instructions that that should not exceed 12% of the estimated construction costs. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the application, that's where this professional services number that you wouldn't be able to exceed. And again, that's based off of those construction elements. And so for professional services, you have engineering costs, you have additional surveys or permitting. All of that is going to go here in professional services. And you can itemize that out if you would like. The second category being land acquisition. And so how many, do we have anyone in here that may submit a project that includes land acquisition? Okay. Remind me, shirts, small community or non-urban? Non-urban, okay. And so at the time of the application, we're not requiring there to be an appraisal if land acquisition is included, but we would like to see that value supported by a third party. And you'll be able to upload that documentation to show us proof of that value in this budget narrative section. And just a reminder too, the land acquisition for Land Water Conservation Fund projects, that will also trigger a Yellow Book appraisal, which is also a lengthy task that could take up to a year. But if your project includes land acquisition, you are adding that, includes land acquisition, and you're using that land acquisition as match. You're going to add that here in the second category. And then the final category is just our construction elements. And so if your project includes a playground, a pavilion, and trails like the one here does, my suggestion is to keep this budget summary simple. And then as you scroll down in the budget narrative section, and I'm not going to click through all of these links for time purposes, but there's great sample budget narratives included in the application. I encourage you to check that out. But keep the budget summary simple and then elaborate and give us the quantities, give us the details in that budget narrative. And as you keep scrolling down, it's also going to give you an opportunity. We're going to know we'd like to know where your costs came from. So whether it's an OPC prepared by an engineer, whether it's a small community that has had a similar project for a playground or pavilion, and you're able to share in the last 12 months, we had this similar project. Just show us where those cost estimates are coming from. And we've got links here for you to upload and verify the costs. Down here in sponsor match, so earlier in the application, you're going to have that resolution uploaded from your county or from your city that's going to show that you've got that match in hand. Here in the budget section, we're also asking just to verify that. And so it's a drop-down menu. If you're a non-urban and you're looking for that grant ceiling, your applicant funds, your match type is going to be all financial, and that value is going to be $750. A lot of times we'll see in some of our smaller communities, they've got to get a little creative with where their match comes from, and they're able to show us that or explain that there in the sponsor match section. Does anybody have any questions budget related? As again, I know Blake had briefly mentioned that in terms of this typically being a page where you might see some errors at the top. And so all of these will need to be addressed before you're able to submit. And so if you do have professional services that are included and you've included those as match too, there's also this beginning date of pre-agreement services that can date 3 years? 3 years before the application. And so if your project is including professional services, you'll want to make sure that you've got that pre-agreement services date so that those are all eligible to be reimbursed. Am I missing anything on the budget? Yeah, of course.
Obviously, our project is conceptual still, so the high level, but we have engineered processes, but no plans yet. how hard and fast is this budget, you know, if we're under professional services, are we able to use that under, to make up the shortfall in the area? When we get into construction?
Absolutely, yeah.
There's some flexibility, yes.
We understand their estimate. It's been real challenging, obviously. For years, so, you know, build a little in there for that. And if you've got $100,000 for trails and $50,000 for restroom renovation, that comes in low. We are.
Any other questions specific to budget? Blake, am I going to need you again?
Residents, respondable pause screen, no participants. Come on, get up here. Pause our screen. Okay, definitely our remote participants, I don't see that. And we have to escape here, but we have to set our display settings back to extend over here. Not to duplicate. Okay. Changes. Okay. And then we're going to bring our PowerPoint back over. All right. And we're going to slideshow from current slide. All right. And now here we'll share prior to. And that's it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right. So again, just consistency. And so you're telling us about your project in that statement of work, in the budget summary. In that statement of work, in the budget summary, along with on that site plan. And so consistency is key. What you tell us about in that statement of work should also be reflected on that site plan and on the budget as well. Moving into the site plan.
Talk about that plan.
Okay.
Thanks, Crystal. So I mentioned that, you know, we understand that the cost estimates are, you know, they're just that, they're estimates at the time of the application. As far as the site plan goes, we understand that there are conceptual site plans too. And so by submitting a conceptual site plan or a well-developed site plan with your application, there's still some flexibility in terms of how that works. Things change through detailed design. Obviously, things change through construction. So we understand all that. But we do need to see a site plan with the application just so we can properly evaluate what it is you're proposing. The site plan itself, you know, the more information you can provide there, the easier it is for us to determine your park project. And so the park boundary, first and foremost, is the most important thing that we need to see. And that's because, you know, by establishing that, we're determining what that boundary that's going to be protected in perpetuity is going to look like. North arrow, scale bar, legend, you know, those are all great things that help us properly evaluate the proposal. Utilities and easements, those are always great to have on there as well. And then the proposed grant elements. We've got a few examples of site plans that we've developed. And so for us, you know, this was prepared, this was in CAD, and this was brought over into Photoshop. And so it looks nice. It has all the required information. It's easy to read. In our mind, you know, this has all the required information as well. And so, you know, provided that both of these site plans were developed and a lot of thought, you know, through a thoughtful process of determining what those elements are, where those elements are located. To us, this conveys that information equally well. as equally well as this one. And so, you know, a lot of times we will see hand-drawn sketches or things that are done in Microsoft Paint. And, you know, if they've got all the info on there, if the site plan accurately corresponds to the project narrative, if it accurately corresponds to the budget, that's sufficient in our mind. And so it is important that there's a lot of consistency between that narrative and that budget and that site plan. If there's elements listed in the budget or site plan and not the other way around, it's hard for us to evaluate exactly what it is that's prepared or being proposed. So this slide kind of goes into that in a little more detail. And so the narrative here, the city of Arlen is developing, renovating an existing park, and then it lists all the different elements that are proposed. And so at this point, I'm going through the narrative section here. So you can see the narrative here, and here's the budget that's prepared on the budget form that Crystal just went over. And so within the budget there, you see playground, you see pavilion, lighting, utility connections, restrooms, landscaping, 2 picnic sites for $500. And then you see the site plan. And so does anyone, can anyone, in looking at this quickly, determine any inconsistencies between the 3 of these? And so specifically, we see that the budget calls out 2 picnic sites, but then we look on the site plan here and we see a number of picnic sites. And so for us, you know, it becomes a question of, well, are we $500 for 4 picnic sites? And so, you know, those are the kind of things, the cleaner, the more consistency, the more helpful it is for us. Any questions on site plan from anyone?
One of the bigger things to add to here, and I think that we continue to talk about consistency as we were doing applications in the last cycle. There were lots of inconsistencies, and so a lot of times we're going to the budget and see what's actually being purchased versus, you know, looking at that statement of work. And so specifically as well, this narrative is saying this isn't all abilities playground. It's the universal playground, which would also get you additional points in the scoring system for accessibility. But in the budget narrative, you just identify a playground that's 300,000. You know, a lot of those universal playgrounds are well into $500,000. And so those are the types of questions, you know, that we're thinking through. And so again, it's just so important to be clear, and so that all of those, especially the budget and the site plan, and then those all aligned.
Well stated, Crystal. Why am I doing these? And so site plan tips. Again, you know, we're not familiar with your park. We're not as familiar with your project. And so this is really your opportunity to convey all that information to us. And so, you know, not only the park itself, but, you know, you'll have an opportunity to provide a vicinity map, to provide a location map. And so, you know, kind of let us, you know, get us familiar with your town, with this park in particular. Site photos kind of correspond with that as well. And so, you know, again, the more info and the more detail you can provide, the better. You know, a document with site photos with some sort of legend or something kind of indicating, you know, here's this vacant corner here. This is where we're planning on putting the all abilities playground. If there's any specific environmental areas or specific habitat that you're looking to conserve, preserve, you know, take a picture of that and let us know what that looks like. Okay, and now I think integrity is the next one we're going to go into, and I'll welcome Crystal and Megan back up.
All right, so moving into integrity, it's worth 15 points. The first thing that we're wanting to see is that organizational capacity. So it'll ask you to list staff that are going to be working or managing through the grant administration side of the project, along with their experience, any experience, whether it's state or federally funded projects. And I think too, just a note to think through, especially in some of our smaller communities, a lot of times we'll see excuse me, that one contact person, which is great to have that go-to person. But if or when that person is no longer with the organization, so just think through in terms of listing one person to where, you know, if that person is no longer there, or thinking through a fiscal point of contact versus a project management point of contact. In this section, we're also looking for the maintenance plan that's specific to the project scope. We've got a great example listed in our application that's used by sponsors often, but just make sure if what's included in your statement of work is a splash pad, we want to see a maintenance plan or some thought put into the maintenance and the care for that facility for 25 years. So we want to at least see that element in the maintenance plan. And it's also going to ask you to describe the staffing and the funding that you've got, you know, in order to support those facilities. Because again, it's super important. We want to see those facilities out in those parks for a minimum of 25 years for outdoor recreation and for 40 years for the pools. And the second part being past performance. So if you're a first-time applicant or you're in full compliance with our program, there's 10 points. If an applicant is not in compliance, with whether it's previously state or federally funded project, but you provided us with that action plan moving forward, and hey, we realize that this is out of compliance, but this is what we're doing to address that, and the timeline, whether that's a year down the road. You know, we've got Amy has been brought on board. She's our compliance coordinator. She does a great job with working with sponsors. A lot of times, sponsors may not be familiar with what parks have been funded in their county or in their city. And so I'd also just encourage you to reach out and ask for that information if you don't already have it. But some of the items, Amy's unfortunately not here today, some of the items that she listed in terms of common past performance issues was previous inspection showed missing park elements, and it was less than that 25-year post installation. Part of the park is no longer available to the public, or a non-outdoor recreation item's been installed at the park. And it also mentions if your municipality was awarded, but the municipality canceled the project, that money cannot be used again and the state of Texas loses it. So that city or county has to wait 3 years before applying again. And Megan will go a little bit more into our compliance after the money is spent.
Okay, so we're moving into compliance now that your park has been established. Every 5 years, we're going to come out and inspect your park to ensure that all the elements that are part of your project are on the park. All grant elements must be available for 25 years, and then with pools and recreation centers for 40 years. The park stays, and then we want to make sure that the park is staying public and is providing outdoor recreation in perpetuity. So what happens if you need the park for something else? There is a way to take the grant encumbrance off a park, but it takes a lot of resources and considered a very last resort. It's very important to make sure that the grant application is for a park that has no plans to be developed or for any immediate changes. I don't know what happened. The computer just like.
All right, well, thanks for joining us.
You can hear the fan.
Which slide do you want to go from?
If you can get me to compliance, I can go from 57.
57? Okay.
Yep, I Thank you. Okay, and can the park be just for residents? The park needs to be available for all residents and visitors to Texas. You can charge fees for certain park amenities, but they are required to be consistent with fees at other similar parks in the area, and do not charge one group of people more than twice the fee of another group of people. So for example, if it costs your residents $5 to use the pool, you don't want to charge more than $10 for non-residents to use the pool. And then when we come out and do our compliance inspections, what we're looking for is to make sure that they are open to the public, they're safe, they're welcoming, and providing outdoor recreation. We're always here to help, both with funding and future park protection. And now I'll have Lindsay talk.
Howdy, my name is Lindsay Sansom. I am new to Texas Parks and Wildlife. I started a month before Crystal, and before that I was at Texas A&M University as a research assistant professor for a number of years. But I'm happy to be here back at Texas Parks and Wildlife, and thanks for joining me today. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about service, and the service section is worth 30 points, so that's pretty significant. The community need is worth 10 points. This is where you can really talk to us about like what are the approved open space master plans that you have for your community, and how was public input gathered either specifically for your proposed project or for your park system in general. And you can specify, please, like how you gathered that public input and document that story whenever possible. You know, if you're reaching out to your community members through social media, or if you're having them come to a city hall, or any ways that you're reaching out to your communities. If you're doing an online survey, that is also considered a way of engaging with the public to develop parks. So the geographic distribution is another way to gain points. So essentially, if this is the very first park in your service area, then you automatically get 5 points, which is exciting. But if it's not, that's okay. Just please explain how the project fills a critical park need or a recreation gap that you have in your community, and show us that you did, again, engage with your community to develop those ideas and identify those needs and priorities. So on other ways that you can get these points is, even if it's not a new park, is it fulfilling a new park element within your system? So for instance, if you don't have a skate park and this is the very first skate park, then that could be another way to get points. The other point that's really important for the geographic distribution section is to identify whether or not the project is safely accessible by multiple methods of transportation. So is it close to a metro station? Or if you're in a more rural community and you don't have that kind of public transportation, are there safe roads where people can drive and park safely? We want to make sure that it's not just like in a neighborhood and there's no way to get to it or park once you get there. So that's one way that you can show us that there are ways for everyone to equitably access that park. Underserved populations is a big one. That one's worth 10 points. This is where we really want you to do a little bit of research and explore what are the needs of your community, and and how can this project positively impact especially low income and ethnic minority residents. So to demonstrate this, we ask that we have some training videos on how to do this, but we ask that essentially you use census data information and economic and demographic data for the service area. And again, we have some training videos. You can find the link in Argo that will help you calculate that information. Accessibility. This one is really important. First of all of our parks are required to be accessible and to meet basic ADA and ABA standards. And if you list an element in the narrative, then it needs to be in the narrative and the budget and the site plan. So for instance, if it is a universal design playground or an ADA designed playground element, that needs to be called out not only in the narrative, but we want to see it in the site plan where you say playground. We want to see universal design playground, and in the budget, instead of just listing playground, we want it to match and be consistent across all of those elements. So that is really important, just to make sure that your left hand knows what the right hand is doing, because sometimes communities will hire consultants to work with them, and the consultants write this beautiful narrative that talks all about how wonderful and ADA and accessible their elements are, but it's not reflected in the budget. It's not necessarily reflected on the site plan. So those are things that are really important to pay attention to. Additionally, we have extra ways that you can get more points for accessibility. So on the application, there will be something that says, are you going above and beyond required accessibility? And we do have some guidelines, some technical guidance put together that you can use to define what above and beyond means. But essentially, if you are creating a special opportunity specifically for people with disabilities or with special needs, then so examples that we list are like zero entry pools, all ability playground elements, adult changing stations and restrooms is a big one. Those can really make a difference to the people in your community. So we really encourage you to incorporate those into your not only your narrative, but your site plan and your budget. All right, stewardship. This one's my favorite. So you can get up to 20 points on this, and it's a really great way to improve the outcome, not only for your recreational opportunities, but for your community overall. A lot of people, I will say, a lot of people get confused between sustainability and conservation. So before we get into the points, we're going to just talk a little bit about what is sustainability. In this context, for local park grants, sustainable design means focusing on the environmental impact and reducing the amount of resources that a site might use. So for instance, solar lighting, or something like doing xeriscaping, and really trying to find those design elements that reduce the amount of resources needed, so for instance, using recycled materials and benches, trash cans, etc. If you're doing something like that, we ask you to provide documentation to support what you're doing. So that could be cut sheets, that could be anything like that. That goes for accessibility as well. If you're using those design elements that are very specialized, we ask that you provide that documentation. Essentially, what we really want here is for you to demonstrate, in order to get points for sustainable design, we're asking for you to demonstrate that you are reducing the impact on the environment, reducing the amount of resources necessary to maintain your site park elements, and ensuring that those resources can last as long as possible and be resilient. So we have a couple examples in here of what to do and what not to do. This is a lot of text on this screen, but we will be sharing this information with you later. And if anyone ever has any questions about what is sustainable design versus not, first of all, we are currently in the process of updating our sustainable design, conservation, and accessibility technical resources. Those are not available yet, but we do currently have some resources available for technical guidance. And our team is always happy to help you during the pre-agreement or the pre-application phase to get input on any ideas you might have. So sustainable design, you can get 10 points here. We need to just successfully demonstrate that you're integrating sustainable design features and practices. And again, that those elements need to be in the scope and the budget and the site plan. And anything that reduces energy use, water use, or emissions is considered sustainable design elements. Again, please include those spec sheets as appropriate to make sure that we are, that you have documented what you're planning to do and explain how your agency is equipped to care for those elements. So that can be incorporated into like the maintenance plan. All right, conservation. So in this context of local park grants, conservation, what we mean by conservation design is protecting or improving the plant and animal resources at a site. So there are a lot of different easy conservation features that you may be incorporating already that you don't even think of necessarily as conservation. But so if you are looking at the site plan for your community and there are sensitive or unique features about those about that piece of property, like you're probably already going to want to conserve those special features, right, and highlight them. And so we really encourage you to describe that in your narrative and in the site plan, and call it out on the site plan. And you can get additional points if you identify a wetlands only. I mean, you're not going to be able to build in the wetlands area anyway. And so if you can call it out as preserved open space and maintain it in a way that improves conservation, you can get additional points on your application, but also you're creating like a really cool space in your parks for your community to use. So same thing for if there's a creek or a wetland and ponds, karst zones, any of this, like we want to make sure that we're maintaining and protecting those special places. And other ways to incorporate conservation, you can have like grow zones along your creek banks that can encourage wildlife and wildlife habitat and plant nurseries and protection of creek banks that are prone to erosion. That reduces your costs for maintenance overall anyway, if you're already incorporating those natural design elements to prevent erosion. So if landscaping is part of the design, you can make sure, try to incorporate things that have food or pollen, are good for pollinators, or for all of the site plans, if you have landscaping, I don't think this has been touched on yet, but if you have landscaping that you'd like to get reimbursed for, they have to be native plants in order to be eligible for reimbursement. So we do have a list that we can provide of those native plants that you can use, but you can incorporate them as part of a conservation design as well. Rain gardens or bioswales, like you need to design drainage anyway. Why not incorporate and use the natural design elements to save money and also promote conservation? So when we're looking through all of the applications and we're trying to determine whether or not projects get the conservation points, we can ask, like, does the project scope include a clear conservation effort? Are you actively protecting or restoring these critical ecosystems? Are you fencing off, or not fencing off, but are you designing around those special parts of your park in a way that's conserving the natural environment while making it accessible to the public? And so signage is one of those things that's an eligible expense, interpretive signage. And are you creating awareness of the natural and cultural resources on that site? Again, with this one, everything has to be in the narrative and the budget and the site plan. So we want to make sure that if you call it out in the narrative, that it's in all parts of the narrative. We want it in the project summary. We want it in the questions about conservation. That's something that a lot of communities miss. They might put it in the conservation area, but they don't call out those elements in the project summary at the beginning. So it's really important with all of these design features, whether or not it's sustainability, accessibility, conservation, to ensure that it's consistent across all portions of the narrative, the site plan, and the budget. You will be asked to fill out a floodplain and an environmental impact table. And we do provide examples of that you can use. So here's a brief example about kind of what that environmental impacts table can look like. It can be daunting at first, but based on our limitations in Argo currently, right now we have no negligible impacts or minor impacts or major impacts or not applicable. So we want you to call out the positive impacts too. Like, this is not just about the negative impacts. We want you to say, yes, this is going to improve circulation and traffic by, you know, how in whatever way it does. I mean, we don't want you to lie, but we want you to be honest about both the positive and the negative. And the more thorough that you can make this table, the better it is for us, especially if you are a non-urban or an urban community, because we use this information whenever we're putting together the MPS application. So it's really important that you are as thorough as possible. And if you need help with any of this, we're always available to reach out. All right, I'm going to pass it back over to Megan.
All right, so now we're going to talk about teamwork. The teamwork is going to include coordination with subject matter experts and partnerships, and that's worth 10 points. So what we're looking for here in teamwork with the coordination of subject matter experts is worth 5 points. We want to see that you have sought expert input into the design, the construction, and the planning of your project. These experts are going to include consultants, engineers, landscape architects, TPWD staff, playscape representatives, and so on and so forth. Has the sponsor identified relevant permits? We want to make sure that you're aware and have started the processes such as the National Historic Preservation Act, which is going to be held under the Texas Historic Commission, and make sure that you have started the permit process for that. Anything that needs to be done through NEPA and anything done through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And then we want documentation, so provide email correspondence, letters, price quotes and specs, and or any notes from your meeting showing that you have met with these subject experts. And then go on and do this one too. So teamwork partnerships is another 5 points. We want to see clear evidence of organized community support. These are going to include fundraisers, volunteer days, residents presenting or requesting for this park at city meetings. So we want to see that you have reached out to your community, and we want to see what their wants and needs are and how this project fits in with the community's wants and needs. Verified overmatch. We want to make sure these funds are going toward this project that are beyond what the grant will match. If so, we want you to provide documents or official letters committing those funds to the project. For example, if the grant is providing $150,000 and the city is matching it with $150 and the Elks Club is donating an extra $50,000, this $50,000 is considered overmatch, and it can be verified with a letter from the Elks Club committing it to the specific project. Letters of support. We love to see letters of support. We want to see who wants this park. Local residents and leaders, school principals, school children, athletic organizations, etc. And then I'm going to hand it over to Lindsay to talk a little bit more about her TORP survey.
All right, guys, it's the second plug for the TORP survey in one meeting. So I just really want to hammer home the importance of this survey for you and your communities, because we've just spent the last hour going through all of the scoring criteria, and you saw the distribution of points for all of those different things. We use this TORP survey. It helps us to update that scoring criteria. So essentially, it is a needs assessment. We want to know, what are the changing trends in your community? What are the kinds of projects that you need? How would you use this money if whenever you're going to be applying for these grants? Like, how are you planning on using this grant money? We just want to make sure that we're funding the types of projects that everyone needs, because as we all know, recreation trends change over time. And so it's really important. This is the way for us to ensure public participation and public input. It is a way for us to make sure that we are really updating that scoring criteria to reflect the needs of Texas, because we know that it's changing and growing all the time. So I know it's a little lengthy, but please fill out my survey. We're using the data to update this. And at the very end, there's also an opportunity. We ask whether or not you'd be interested in being involved in either a focus group or a community advisory board. So that's another way of us inviting the communities across Texas to engage with us on this process of updating the scoring criteria. So that's all I have for the TORP survey. Does anybody have questions about the survey? No, it's available online. It is available at paper copies in the back. I have a link, and and we'll move on to questions about the actual grant application. So I'll go ahead and start fielding those questions. First of all, thank you so much for coming today. I guess we'll open up the floor to questions.
On the specific areas where on these application were as required the narrative and the description of the work. Like I mentioned, how it can get timed out. I want to clarify. Was it a recommendation to go ahead and create a Word document and cut and paste?
Yes. I would, yes, we highly recommend you writing the application in a Word doc. That way you can continue to edit it as long as you'd like, because as we mentioned, starting early is like very important. That way you can work on it throughout. You're not trying to jam it all in there at the very last minute. And having a Word document will help you do that. And then you can just, as you make changes, you can just copy and paste it into Argo. That way you don't get timed out, you don't lose any work that you spent, we don't want you to sit there for 45 minutes writing like a beautiful scope of work and then have it time out and lose all that work.
You may start out thinking, yeah, I'll save every 5 minutes, I can do that, and then you stop.
Yeah.
Thinking about what you're writing, you're not save button. And like I said, because you can't, the official longest amount of timeout the system can offer is 60 minutes in a session, and that's what it's set to. However, most networks don't allow a 60-minute uninterrupted connection. They're just not going to do that. You'll see the page in front of you, but all the buttons on the page that save it are not in fact there anymore. So when you go to save, there's nothing, you're clicking something that doesn't exist anymore. It's like an image of something that existed 30 minutes ago, right? So it's just a way to make sure that you don't lose anything that's an extensive narrative. The other parts of the application, there are many parts you will not have to do that. But if you're writing to something that's 8,000 words, this might be a good idea to type that, whether it's in a text document, a Word document, an email to yourself, whatever. Make sure you have that text somewhere where it's not going to get lost if you forget to save it.
Yeah, we just don't want you coming up against that 5 p.m. cutoff and then all of a sudden all your progress is gone.
For the urban 1.5 million grant on that, for those submittals, they must have a land water conservation focus.
So those submittals will be paid with land and water conservation funds, which means that you'll have to go through the NEPA compliance process. And so it's usually a lengthier process. We try to make our sponsors aware of all of the things that they'll need to do, and it's better to get those things started as soon as possible. As Crystal mentioned, if there is an acquisition that's part of it and you're either an urban or a non-urban, the chances are you're most likely going to be paid using the land and water conservation funds. And so we need to be sure that you're reaching out as soon as possible to get that yellow book appraisal, because it can be a very lengthy time period. But there's several pieces of compliance. If there's water, you might have to coordinate with the Corps of Engineers. I mean, you will have to coordinate with the Corps of Engineers. But in terms of the goals, are you talking about at the very beginning under excellence? One of the things is we have short-term and long-term goals, and then we have how do your goals relate to TPWD, the water land and water plan, and then the Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan, and then the Land and Water Conservation Fund. So That's really where you can just have those strategic goals and connect your project with those strategic goals. I think, as Crystal said, like, everybody is going to be able to connect to number 2, and hopefully there are other ways that, in all of those documents, all of those strategic planning documents are available online. They're available on our system through Argo. The Texas Outdoor Recreation Plan is in the process of being updated, as is the Land and Water Conservation Plan for TPWD. But the TPWD Natural Agenda is currently available. That one's in its most updated form. And for this cycle of grants, you won't be able to use the new ones, but you can still use the 2018 TORP and the 2015 Land and Water Plan. And just making sure that those goals, strategic goals, are aligned with what you're doing. Okay.
Interior exhibits, major center exhibits.
So for this round, we don't have any funding for indoor facilities. Yeah, so that would be considered an indoor grant. It would be eligible. We just, for this round, we don't have the funding for the indoor.
I guess it's back on the indoor, talking about indoor. I know it's not available right now, but let's say next year we want to apply. Would it be possible to get funding for indoor and outdoor, or would you only be able to qualify for one?
If possible, really, the only time that becomes an issue is if, for example, you have an active grant for 2 or 3 years and you haven't really made any progress on it. That could hinder your ability to get the grant. But we've got several sponsors that have more than one active grant.
With facilities that are connected to outdoor, like say swimming pools, whether it's restrooms, change rooms, are those considered ineligible to the indoor, or would it be part of the outdoor?
Those are eligible. So a restroom is an eligible, it's considered a support cost. So one thing that we didn't get into with the budget is so it is an eligible expense, but support costs are not prioritized as highly as direct recreation costs are. So if there is a grant that is only outdoor recreation and no support, that one is going to score. It's calculated as part of the overarching budget. So if your budget is mostly support facilities, like a restroom or parking is considered support, you don't score as highly as a project that has primarily recreation, direct recreation costs.
Schoolhouse, concession stand, restroom, that would all be eligible to do that. Basically, climate control, or it goes into climate control environment, it's probably considered indoor.
Any other questions so far? How do I find the questions?
Are they in the chat?
Yeah. Maybe pop it out.
I'm gonna pop this out larger. You can expand this out and get a full list of this. Let's drag it up here. Can follow that.
Oh, there's a lot of questions.
Well, some of these have been answered during the course of the presentation,
Okay.
but there you go.
Okay. Okay, so one of the questions is, so should they have also included that the splash pad, butterfly garden, and prairie restoration are not part of this grant? They aren't in the budget. I guess that was an example up on one of our site plans maybe. So yes, as we said before, you have to be consistent all across your narrative, your project scope, your budget, and your site plan. So, and the other thing that we recommend is like in the site plan, if you do have overmatch items that you want to show that are being built with overmatch monies, just make sure that you're calling those out separately, or you can do it in whatever way you'd like on your map. Either you can color code them and say these elements are overmatch only, or you can just simply only list the elements that are grant elements. It's really up to you guys. Just make sure that it's clear that all of the elements in the site plan are which ones are funded through as grant elements. Sidewalk. Oh, yeah. Okay, so what Crystal just said, for those who are online, you might not have been able to hear her, but essentially, if you have a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, be sure that you are calling out the grant elements for that particular phase and for that particular grant, and make sure that it's super clear in your site plan which elements are being funded. So there's a question on the disbursement timeline. So for outdoor park and garden. Dan, do you want to talk about that? So I think that the question is about reimbursements. Is that right? Yes, okay. So essentially yeah, go ahead. Disbursement timeline.
Okay. So if you're awarded a grant, we'll get you set up through a direct deposit prior to the agreement being issued. And generally speaking, if a reimbursement request is submitted and it's complete and has all the required information in there, it takes about a month to get reimbursed. Now, if there's some additional coordination needed on the request and maybe some additional documentation is needed, that can result in a little bit of a delay there. But our auditors, we've got a full fiscal team with a team of auditors, and they're happy to work with you on that.
I think the other question is the max timeline.
So the max timeline is 4 years from the grant award, from when the grant agreement is issued. Again, we get 4 years right away on a state funded grant. For a federal grant, they still give you 3 years, and we have the ability to extend that to 4 years if needed. And a PDF version will be available. So we're recording this presentation, so we'll put the audio recording, audio and video recording on Argo under the local park resources, and then we'll also put a PDF of the presentation. All of our contact information is on there as well. So please, if anyone has any questions about anything we've covered today, please reach out to us.
That about wraps us up, unless anybody else has any additional questions. Yes.
That's true, yeah, and we're hoping, you know, that our state funding will be a little more on par with our federal funding for the upcoming biennium. So hopefully we'll have more ability to. Yeah. Oh, do you really?
Yeah, well, it's a bigger parcel and park's gonna go to park system and the other.
Okay.
So we'll convert it.
Oh, yeah.
It's future, so.
Well, come talk to us.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out one more time, this is a really great resource. So whenever you go to the Argo login page, all you have to do is click on the resources and the local park grants program. And there are a ton of technical guidance documents that are there to help you if you get stuck or to help you navigate a difficult piece of the project. So again, as you're moving through this, first consult Argo and try to work through those resources. And then as you have questions, reach out to your grant coordinator. And we are always happy to help our sponsors make their projects better. We want you to have the most competitive application packet possible. So please use us as a resource. We are also considered subject matter experts. So that part at the very end, when you can get the extra points, you know, please reach out to us and use us in that capacity. All right. I think that's it. Thank you, guys.